We're excited that our pick is an in-house candidate. It's Chief Deputy Bill Cox. He served with us for a number of years, and I can get into that.
That was Mayor Ken Adams talking about his choice for Olive Branch Police Chief. I'm Sam Rikard.
And I'm Kristen Terrell. This is DeSoto County Newsroom, your North Mississippi news source.
Olive Branch will have a new chief of police beginning on July the 1st. Mayor Ken Adams made his recommendation to the Board of Aldermen last night.
I was able to sit down with Mayor Adams today and talk about his choice for the new chief and his goals and expectations. Why was Chief Cox the choice?
He did a great job coming from the corporate setting. I conducted panel interviews of all the candidates that made the cut, so to speak. I had Alderman at Large George Collins on the panel, who's our longest serving alderman and very knowledgeable about the city and the needs of the city. I had our HR director, Vicki Damron. She sat on the panel as well. So we required some things that some agencies or some cities might not require. Required them to come in with a standing standing presentation of 8 to 10 minutes on what their plan would be for the first 90 days in the department if they were selected. And then we went through a series of questions after that and rated the candidates on the questions. And Bill stood out. He was very good background, very detailed background. Just briefly, he had been in law enforcement for over 20 years and had been in a law enforcement leadership position for over 13 years. He also served as police chief at for another city, Philadelphia, Mississippi, for a short period. And when he left Olive Branch because he had an ailing parent that he would need to go check on, and he was police chief of that city, and then he came back to Olive Branch after that. So he knows the things that we're faced with on a daily basis, and we feel like he was the best person. He came in with a great plan to tell us what he plans to do to make our department, which is a very good department, to make it even better in the long run.
And so how will he make the department better in the long run?
He knows from a leadership standpoint, he knows the other leaders that need to be groomed. He knows the needs of the boots on the ground, so to speak, the officers, the armed officers, the investigators. He knows our warts and bruises. Kind of all agencies have those things. You have positives and negatives, and he knows constructively what needs to be addressed. And he knows that I've got a couple things for him to work on. Retention is very important. Law enforcement in today's environment, retention is a challenge, and that's one of the goals for him to work on, without a doubt. Morale of the troops, retention of the troops, but at the end of the day, the safety for our citizens, that's paramount. That's item number one. That's got to remain number one. Our citizens expect to live in a safe and secure environment, and we've got to make sure that takes place.
Yeah, we've had, in fact, Sam and I were just talking about the fact that we have had a little bit of an increase in crimes in parking lots. So a couple of shootings at Target and Walmart recently. What must the police do to make sure that those things don't continue to happen?
Right. They must have a high visibility. They've got to have a presence that would make the bad guy or the bad gal go somewhere else. We've got to do that. Those incidents that you mentioned predominantly were what I call bleed over crime from our neighbor city next door to the north, but at the same time we've got to deal with that, and we've got to create an environment to where the criminal element knows that we're not ripe for picking, we're not a soft target, and they need to go elsewhere. The Mississippi court system has been good about strongly dealing with offenders, but at the same time we want to deal with them to where they don't even enter our city and they stay away. So important to be proactive and to educate our citizens to where that they know when to call us so that we can deal with those things on the front end. The successful chief, being Bill, has got to blend technology with our human resources, our boots on the ground, in order to make the best program that we can have from an overall positive law enforcement standpoint, but at the same time blending law enforcement with public relations, because we serve the community and we work for the citizens. And right now, from a general citation standpoint, traffic citations, approximately 20% of the tickets written by the City of Olive Branch are courtesy citations to remind a person, hey, slow down, don't do that again, come to a complete stop. So those are kind of low-hanging fruit items where we can best serve our citizens to protect other citizens, but at the same time major crime has got to be dealt with. And I'm that person that 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. when I turn on the local news, normally coming out of the Memphis area, and I see the needless shootings and the tragedies that take place, and I just absolutely know that cannot happen here, because the citizens of Olive Branch deserve to be protected in their homes when they go to and from shopping, dinner, etc. So we've got to do everything we can do with our resources to make that happen and make sure they're protected.
I know for a long time Olive Branch has been a very fast-growing city, and that has continued. How do you grow the police force to match the growth of the citizenry?
Basically, because of annexation that took place last year, before I came into office, we are growing the department by at least 6 officers every year for the next couple of years to better serve the annexed areas. But residential homes are important, businesses are important, our schools are important. We have 10 schools in the DeSoto County school system in Olive Branch, if we include, and we do, the Tech Center, the East Tech Center. So that's 10 schools that we are committed to providing school resource officers to each and every one of those schools to protect our children, to protect the faculty, the teachers, moms and dads as they go to pick up the children. So those are things that are top of mind today just based on national things taking place. So we've got to have positive programs to deal with that.
How do you expect police work in this city to go into the future? We have a very interesting, I guess what I'm trying to ask is we have a very interesting time that we're living in where there's been a real push for defund the police in some areas. How do you keep the public opinion on the side of building up the law enforcement community?
Very, very candidly, I know that's been some of the thought in different cities, but in Olive Branch, our citizens are basically just the opposite. For the most part, the citizens love the police department, they love the fire department, they love our first responders, and they're very supportive of our police department. So they like to see that security presence, they like to see patrol cars in the neighborhood. So that really has not been an issue, and I think the mindset, I know of my administration, and I believe the citizens as a whole in Olive Branch would be to not defund, but to add additional funding, add additional resources to protect their property and to protect them as individuals. I think that's really where we are as a city. Well, Kristen, we also talked about the overall candidates, and I was very pleased that out of the 6 candidates we interviewed, 2 of them were internal and 2 of them were external who had already worked for the Olive Branch Police Department in previous years, and they moved to other agencies and advanced and moved up in their positions. So it was very positive that they wanted to come back. We had a great list of candidates. I appreciate the local media holding off until 3 p.m. today in order to pulse out this information of who the successful candidate is, because I felt like I owed it to the applicants that came in and interviewed. They prepared for a presentation, they went through a lengthy interview, and I wanted to talk to them personally one-on-one versus them reading who the successful candidate was through local media or electronic media. So I appreciate the media taking time to do that. We had some great candidates. We had candidates that citizens and business leaders called and they asked for consideration on their behalf and would share with me how the positives, how they think that person would do a good job. But at the end of the day, we had to stick with our criteria, which was a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, at least 15 years in law enforcement as a law enforcement professional, and X number of years in leadership position, as in 7+ years in a upper leadership position. So we had to stick to that to make sure that we held our standard, but at the same time, we wanted the very best candidate we could get. But I think the community of business leaders, church leaders, etc., that we're pulling for John or Bill or Sally would understand that at the end of the day, we're taking the very best position that we can for this job.
Director or Chief Cox, is that Chief Cox? Is that right? Mm-hmm. How will there be any change, I guess, under him in the daily workings of the police department? Does he have any different philosophy than Don Gammage has?
He has a philosophy very similar to Chief Gammage's, that we're serving the community and we want to do community policing and be very high on being oriented toward the community. At the same time, he knows the importance of law enforcement. He shared in his plan that we'll have some changes, and probably not fair for me to divulge that with all the other rank not knowing those, but he did a great presentation with what those changes would look like, and obviously I'm going to hold him to those changes, and I have some carrots on the stick for him in order to make sure we retain our officers, we lessen the turnover, which is a big problem nationwide in law enforcement, and that we do good community policing and take our troops, our our boots on the ground and make sure they're involved in decision making and they have a seat at the table to where they know they're a part of this department. So I think there'll be some changes, and there should be. Any organization, a new leader is going to make some changes, but I fully support him, and I think he'll do a great job for the city.
All right. Olive Branch Mayor Ken Adams on the choice of Deputy Chief Bill Cox as the new police chief in Olive Branch, replacing Don Gammage. I know this was a weighty decision, and you're familiar with that decision, having been mayor for 16 years.
Right, yeah, I had to make that decision 4 times during my 16-year tenure, and it is a difficult decision, and certainly one that is so important to the police officers in the department, so important to the citizenry, all around us. They want to make sure that we have a safe place to live, a safe environment here in Olive Branch, and yeah, that decision always involved looking at a lot of resumes, listening to a lot of people with their advice and suggestions, and prayer about the decision, because it was one that was very important to the community. So I wish the administration and the new police chief, Bill Cox, well in this next period of history in Olive Branch. That's not the only decision that the board made last night.
Right. They also looked at redrawing the ward lines for the Board of Aldermen.
Okay.
So redistricting, you also looked at that last night, made some decisions there. Really, you have to redraw lines based on where the population goes, correct?
That's correct. Based on the 2020 census, we had to redraw those lines. It was not solely an annexation issue, because every 10 years a census comes out and cities and counties have to redraw these type lines, but the annexation from the previous administration did factor in, so we had to draw those lines, and very candidly, we have 6 wards now under the new plan, just like we had 6 wards before. We did our publicly noticing, and we had 2 public hearings about the proposed plans to get citizen input on those, and at the end of the day, just a brief summary. In 2010, Olive Branch had 33,484 citizens in the 2010 census. The 2020 census, we had 39,781, not including the annexed area, because the annexation was completed after the census was finalized. So we had 46,466 citizens post-annexation. So we grew by 6,755 citizens based on annexation, but since 2010 we grew by almost 13,000 citizens, 12,982. So a lot of changes. I mean, there's 299 cities in the state of Mississippi, 82 counties, a lot of townships is not even included in the 299, but the vast majority of those cities have less than 10,000 population. So we have a very large city, arguably 5th in the state, depending on whose numbers you look at. Some people look at census that was post-annexation, some after, but we're around the 5th largest city in the state, and we're operating by the same guidelines that all cities operate under, and again, most of those are relatively small. At the end of the day, our goal after the latest numbers came in was to do our best to get every ward, all 6 wards, to an ideal population of 7,744 citizens in each ward.
And so there won't be any new positions. The wards, there's still 6 wards. You'll still have 6 representatives, or a representative from each of those wards, correct?
That's correct. By statute, it'll be 6 alderman wards based on our population, and of course we have 1 alderman at large.
Is there any other way you could have drawn the lines?
We possibly could have drawn them differently, but let me give you a high-level overview of what the law requires us to do every time there's a census. It tells us that wards should be drawn in relatively equal population, meaning we need to get as close as we can to that number of 7,744 in each ward. We need to provide for 10% or less deviation among the wards, and we did a great job doing that. We ended up with a deviation of only 4.9%, so less than 5% instead of less than 10%. We need to make sure that we maintain racial integrity of existing districts, free of racial discrimination, is what we had to do, and we did that as well. I can give you those numbers in a moment, but our boundary lines have to be visible, and with lines of demarcation, which you'll see on the map that they are very visible. We were to avoid, where possible, splitting census blocks, and we did that as well. We were to make the least change possible to the existing wards in order to accommodate the new area. And then also we were required to incorporate public comments and input, which we did in 2 public meetings. So at the end of the day, one ward was basically, for lack of better words, full of homes and residents, and very minor change was needed on that. That's Ward 6. Matter of fact, it was downsized just a little bit based on what they started with. Their population had already been in excess of 7,744, not much, 7,464, but others were less and they had to be enlarged in size. But really, Ward 5 ended up having to shift to the northeast some to pick up that area out towards Center Hill that was incorporated. Ward 4 and Ward 2 had to grow somewhat to the southwest to pick up those areas that were incorporated down toward Craft Road, down toward Bridgeforth Road. So that's what took place.
Well, that's not the only decision that was made on Tuesday. Voters across Mississippi went to the polls in the primary elections for the congressional seats. And here in the 1st Congressional District, Republican incumbent Trent Kelly will be facing Democrat Diane Black in the elections in November. Here are those results.
And we'll be back. Well, as those 2 individuals continue on the campaign trail, the trail to fresh vegetables in Olive Branch leads right to the front door of City Hall.
It certainly does. The Olive Branch Farmers Market kicked off another season on the parking lot of Olive Branch City Hall on Saturday, June 3rd, where they will be every Saturday.
And you can find homemade crafts, homemade jams and jellies, and homegrown vegetables each Saturday through the month of September.
One of the vendors we have there, Bill and Diem, they're farmers who grow vegetables in mineral wells on a 1-acre garden that they use, and they use the biodynamic method of gardening to do that. Drop by any Saturday through September for homegrown or homemade items. Just look at those vegetables that Bill and Diem grow on their farm. Look delicious. They just taste better, don't they, when you can pull them right out of the ground in your yard.
Oh, they do that. I remember as a child sneaking out to the tomato patch and grabbing a tomato off the vine and biting into it. You know, been warmed by the hot sun, and I don't know what you could find that's any better.
I don't either. That's something you got to have in the summer in the South. Well, we thank you so much for joining us for this edition of DeSoto County Newsroom.
Glad you joined us today. I hope you join us again next time.